This is the Great Gate, the entrance to the Giza Plateau. For many people, seeing the pyramids of Giza is a bucket list, once-in-a-lifetime trip that they have to make. So I wanted to take you through what an experience at the Giza Plateau is like, what you can see and what you can expect. To start with, there are two entrances. The Great Gate, which I showed you earlier, is the main entrance, but there is also another entrance. A little heads up, if you're like me and you like doing YouTube videos, you're not allowed to take in a mic. No, you're not allowed a microphone. And when I asked why, they said because they don't want people making YouTube videos. But despite that setback, I still decided to make a YouTube video. I can only think that they don't want to clog up the entrance to the pyramids that you're allowed to access with people making YouTube videos. So I had actually arrived early, but because I was sent from one entrance to the other entrance, which is the second one, the Great Gate entrance, I didn't manage to get into the pyramids as early as I wanted. I was hoping to get into the Great Pyramid early so I could go in when it wasn't too busy, but now I was going to push that back and go to the Great Pyramid last. You do have to go through security and detection devices. You'll have to empty your pockets before you go through to make sure that you're complying with all of their rules before you access the Giza Plateau site. And depending which entrance you go in, if you come in through the Great Gate, you will have to take a bus towards the plateau, and you can get off on different stops. There are cafes, places where you can get refreshments inside. And there's also sparse, but some security just to make sure that people aren't climbing the pyramids on the steps to take photos, which I have been there before, and I remember seeing a teenage boy climb up there and get beaten with a stick because he went too high and the security guard wasn't having any of it. So I went in December, late December, in fact, and it's still pretty warm. If you come from Europe, you'll probably be quite content with how warm the weather is. You can wear shorts and t-shirts, even though you might see locals wrapping up warm in coats. So I was particularly disappointed because I've been here before, and back then the second pyramid, which is the famous one with a cap, also known as the Pyramid of Khafre or Chephren, was shut. So you're seeing the entrance of where you would go in if it was open, but unfortunately for the last few years it has been shut. So I was very disappointed. You can go into the smaller of the three pyramids and you can go into the Great Pyramid, but the second one is shut, unfortunately. I had actually Googled before whether it would be open and it said it was, but when I got there I Googled again and it said it wasn't. So I would take it with a pinch of salt. I would assume that the Great Pyramid would be open most of the time, but the second one seems to be a little bit temperamental. I look online regularly and see if it's open. Sometimes it says it is, and sometimes it isn't, because they do works inside to preserve it and to make sure that it's accessible for people to visit and, of course, do research. As you walk around the plateau and the complex, different people will try and initiate communication with you, conversation, and if they hear that you're English, it's surprising how much of the vernacular that they know. They can say lovely jubbly, all right mate, fish and chips, and all that kind of stuff. They try and guide you to take a picture, which they will ask for money for, or to ride on a camel. And yes, you can get plenty of camel rides around here. If it's your first time, it's definitely worth doing. I feel a little bit sorry for the camels. It doesn't look like they have the most fun time. They look a bit hot, but it is part of the pyramids experience. So although there are 3 famous, larger and more distinctive pyramids, there are actually other pyramids at that site, and they are known as the Queen's Pyramids, and they have been built for royal family members, wives, sisters, supposedly, and they are smaller and you can walk around them. You can't go inside them, but they stand in the shadow of the much bigger ones. What's pretty cool is around the pyramids there are other areas which you can just wander around and it feels like you're in your very own Indiana Jones movies. These areas tend to be quite quiet. If you're a bit adventurous and a bit nosy, you can take a look around these surrounding areas, and it's quite interesting. There's a few of these shafts that are covered up. Some of them you can see the bottom, some of them are a little bit dark, so are fairly deep. But it's definitely a cool experience to see other tombs, mortuary temples around Giza, as they're so called, for high officials. So accordingly, would have had the pyramids for the pharaohs, you'd have had the smaller ones for the wives and families, and then I suppose as you go down the hierarchy, you'd have had some of these complexes around here. I've had to resort to a different way to protect myself from the sun, because I don't have my big hat today, and I am currently walking around the Giza Plateau looking for some tombs, which is one way to make you feel like a proper Egyptologist. So this particular area, which is very interesting and feels like you've gone back in time, is known as the Eastern Cemetery, and it's to the side of the Pyramid of Khufu. I think there's no doubt that this site, the Giza Plateau, has been used in a religious context, and there are tombs here, but perhaps it's people who are venerating the majesty of the pyramids and wanting to be close to it. There are obviously the 3 Great Pyramids of Giza, and then there are other accompanying ones that aren't quite as great, and you can see they've deteriorated quite a lot. Supposedly they're the ones for the wives, so you can see over me you've got 2 bigger, the Great Pyramids, and then another one for the wives. I think because this is such an old and ancient site, you've got people who've used it in different ways, and it's natural that if you came here you would assume that it's all one thing, all connected, and that if there were this many tombs it would make sense. But those big ones would be the biggest and most important tombs. Who knows? I'm skeptical about the tomb theory. But it's a fascinating place, and I can only imagine what it was like to visit before all the tourists got here and people like myself who were using their jumper to cover their face. And to give you some perspective, behind me is Cairo. And over the other shoulder, pyramids. If you can hear this right now, that is the sound of prayers. And I think it's a good demonstration of how today's Egypt is a fundamentally different civilization, different beliefs than the one that inherited this, and that it's different still from the ones that created this. And if you need a perfect example of what I mean by the idea of inheritance, then you need only look behind me and you will see a lion's body with a man's head. But not only that, the head is disproportionate to the body. It's far smaller. It almost looks as if it doesn't fit. And if you can imagine the Sphinx body being covered in sand and all that was left was a highly deteriorated head, perhaps hard to discern what it was. When you uncovered the body, you realized it was a creature of some sort. And then in order to cement your own legacy, you would put your own face on, and there you would have something that generations after would assume is meant to be all in one. Really, it was an adaptation, an inheritance, and it isn't the way it was originally meant. I asked this local to comment on my theories, but he wasn't interested. So once you come down the causeway from the pyramids area towards the Great Sphinx, you go past a little market with some stalls for your tourist souvenirs. And then if you want to go and see the Sphinx itself, you go through the entrance, through the temple of the Sphinx, which in itself is quite impressive. And if you look closely at some of the rocks and the stones that make up this temple, you'll see that they're not all the same size, and that some of them fit together perfectly. But yet we don't know entirely about the production method for this temple. I would expect it to be busy because this is a place where you get many people taking the perfect selfie, getting the perfect profile picture, and it's a quintessential part of visiting Egypt, seeing this amazing structure. Whilst many Egyptologists believe that this is the face of Pharaoh Khafre, authors like John Anthony West challenged this. He actually used a forensic artist called Frank Domingo, who specialized in recreating people's faces, and that he actually contested that the face is perhaps of a different ethnicity to that of Khafre, and of course there are other statues of Khafre for us to be able to compare the face with, but I'll let you decide. I'm open-minded. Whose face is the Sphinx? When was the face put on the Sphinx? When was the Sphinx made itself? There are even people who suggest because of the weather erosion around the Sphinx enclosure, which suggests erosion caused by water and rainfall, that the Sphinx itself is far older than we believe. And the greatest mystery of them all, where is the Sphinx's nose? So after my trip to the Sphinx, I went into a pyramid. I am now walking into Menkaure's pyramid. And whoever built this clearly wasn't very tall. Got my Sphinx t-shirt on for good measure. Menkaure's pyramid is the smallest of the three main pyramids of Giza, and it stands at around 213 feet or 65 meters tall. If you're an Egypt geek like myself, you'll absolutely love being in the pyramids. They are so cool. Which is why I didn't say anything in this clip. I was just happy to be inside the pyramid. I think it's worth saying, whilst this was considered to be a tomb of sorts, there are no inscriptions or paintings on the walls to infer that it was a tomb, and there were no bodies found inside. Pretty cool in this place. No inscriptions on the wall of any kind to signify what it's about. But nice decade. The internal architecture of this pyramid is a lot more intricate, and you can see all the different passages in this one better than you can in the Great Pyramid. I was temporarily alone inside this chamber, and I was tempted to add "Joe was here" onto the wall, but I didn't. All alone, well, I was inside a tomb. It's pretty hot down here. If it wasn't a tomb, it could probably make a pretty good sauna. Trying not to bang my head as I go at the Menkaure pyramid. Hello. Hello. It was pretty nice to see daylight again. And I think that pyramid would make a good little spa. As with so many things around the Giza Plateau, you see things like this and you ask, how and why? As I looked at this pyramid, I imagined energy coming out of the top, which I've actually made a 4-part series discussing the potential of this. So I had held off going towards the Great Pyramid because the queue had been so long before that, but it was around about 3 p.m. and the Giza Plateau closes around 4 p.m. So I thought this was my time to just go for it and go inside, as the queue was relatively good. In winter, it's 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and in summer, it's 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So what you're looking at is called the Robber's Tunnel, and it's the entrance for tourists. It's not how the original constructors and builders of the pyramid would have designed it, and it's actually the result of robbers trying to get into the pyramid. So this is from about 820 AD by Caliph al-Ma'mun in his attempt to find treasure. And it's very rare for it to be this quiet in this part of the pyramid. I have been here before at peak times when there is a literal queue all the way through, up and down the passages, all the way to the king's chamber. We are inside the Great Pyramid, baby. Intrepid explorer looking for a mummy. Or anything really. I'm not picky. And this passageway goes down towards the Queen's chamber, but unfortunately it's not accessible for tourists like you and I. For anyone hoping to go and wants to understand what the experience of the Great Pyramid is like, there is a long section in which you will have to stay pretty low, and you'll be going past lots of other tourists where you'll have to make space for them to get through. And most people returning back are a little bit jaded, very sweaty, and looking forward to getting out. Time to turn around my hat again, because with the cap up, hello, with the cap up, I always seem to bang my head because I can't see the ceiling. Luckily, it's fairly quiet, but you can get periods where there's a lot of traffic. You have to wait for people to go past, and it gets very hot inside here, and you start to sweat. This is what I mean by the traffic. Some people choosing to go backwards. Hey.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just arrived the awesome part.
Yeah. This section here is known as the Grand Gallery. Incredible. And it's a fascinating space because it doesn't really make sense if you think about making a passage for a tomb. It is hot and moist. Sweaty business. This is an incredible part of the pyramid. If you think deeply about this, and this space in particular, This space is inside of a pyramid. And inside of that pyramid, there are other chambers. We are also discovering new, unexplored chambers. How did they construct this? How did they manage to put all of this together? What techniques did they use to move stones of this size? Were they able to model this before they built it? There doesn't seem to be a linear progression towards building something like this. It just seems to have arisen, and it's amazing. There is so much to the pyramids that simply is mind-boggling. And I think the Grand Gallery really exemplifies that. Whoever constructed this were profoundly intelligent, and we still don't really understand how or why. But this monument stands as a testament to their intellect and mastery. But if it was a tomb, why would they build a grand gallery and then have the entrance to the king's chamber be so small? I get the feeling that this place had a function, and it was more than just ceremony. The famous King's Chamber, made entirely of pink granite. I made it to the King's Chamber. Incredible. So there were people meditating around the sarcophagus, and you're not supposed to film inside of the King's Chamber. But if you're pretty sneaky, like me, you can. So, on the bus back, the explanation of the age and how the pyramids were built. But I don't know if I believe it. The Giza Plateau is incredible. But, as with so much of ancient Egypt, you are left asking how and why.